A while back I did a video on silent protagonists and what sort of encompasses them. I mean, they're really a bit of an oddity. And since then I've occasionally paused to think about what is it that really makes a good silent protagonist, especially when it comes to the narrative-driven games that I enjoy so much. And the answer I come up with is kinda hard to put into words, but basically I usually just point to Persona protagonists. A character capable of acting somewhat freely within the game's boundaries thanks to their silent status, while still having enough of a character on their own to not just be a piece of cardboard. Persona has always, at least to me, been the prime example of how to make a silent protagonist. And then I watched the Persona 3 movies. Since then, a different question has been filling my mind. Less, how does a game like Persona make a good silent protagonist, and more, why does a game like Persona even need a silent protagonist? So today I want to talk to you all about the character Yuki Makoto, and specifically how he, as a talking, expressive character, improves on his video game counterpart within the movies. So let's go through them, shall we? The first one, Spring of Birth, begins much the same as the game does. A boy arrives in a strangely green-tinted town that just so happens to be full of upright coffins and pools of blood. There he meets up with Yukari and Mitsuru, who eventually reveal to him that the strange phenomenon known as the Dark Hour occurs every night at midnight, and they invite him to join their after-school group with the intent of eliminating said Dark Hour. For the first 2/3 or so of the movie, not a lot happens different from the games. Yuki behaves pretty much how you would expect his silent counterpart to act, more or less. Quiet, kind of flat, with the occasional funny line thrown in whenever the proper dialogue option comes up. But the first big change comes right around the introduction of the character Fuka. Now, in both the movie and the game, your group finds out that Fuka was locked inside the school gym one night and probably got sucked into Tartarus as a result. So, in the game, you of course need to save her, so your group decide to enter Tartarus the same way she did, so you sneak inside the school, flirt with Yukari a little, get split up inside Tartarus, fight the Emperor and Empress, and ultimately save Fuka. But in the movie, after the discovery that Fuka is trapped inside Tartarus, things start to differ. The group is sitting together, planning on how they're going to infiltrate the school, when Yukari says this. And Makoto replies with this. Yes, the first big change the movie offers is that you don't go with them to save Fuka. Makoto stays home while Akihiko, Junpei, and Yukari make to rescue her. And as such, we finally get to look at the first major character development Yuki Makoto gets that, let's call him Slicko Marx, never did. Namely, he doesn't care about anyone. He joined C's because Mitsuru asked him. He led the team because he was told to. Heck, in the movie, the only reason he pulls the lever and stops the train is because Yukari tells him to do so. All of that builds up over the course of the movie, and it eventually leads to Yukari saying this. Now, to be fair to the game, parts of this character could be inferred in the original game. There are a number of times that it's pointed out that you seem a little too easygoing when it comes to the absurd matters of shadows on the Dark Hour. But in the game, these matters are generally brought up and kind of forgotten. In the movie, when Yuki is given free rein to speak and actually have his own thoughts and emotions, we're actually allowed to focus on it, and we get to see the first major arc for him, namely his evolution from an emotionally dead loner into someone who actually does want to fight, not just because he's told to, but because he wants to protect those close to him. And sure enough, that's what happens. Yuki shows up at the last minute, saves the rest of the group while they're having trouble fighting the Emperor and Empress, and ends up becoming a bit of a better person because of it. Honestly, it's a solid start to his character growth, but we're only on the first movie here, and there's plenty of more interesting things to follow. In the second movie, A Midsummer Night's Dream, once again, things start off pretty similar to how the game transpires. You visit the Love Hotel, Yukari slaps you, you go to the beach, Operation Babe Hunt is a big failure, you meet Igus, so on and so on. Until eventually we get to the Justice and Chariot dungeon, which, as you may remember, is also the first time when C's officially meets the dark and sinister group known as Strega, namely Gothic Jesus and Bitchface here. The scene itself plays out rather similarly to the game. Strega asks, "Why would you bother destroying the Dark Hour? Don't you realize it's what gives our life meaning? Blah 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 blah," and they lock you inside with a giant tank, only this time they have access to poison gas for some reason. You see, it's not too different from the original game, but in the movies this creates a sort of ripple that slowly builds in size over the course of the movies until it comes crashing down at the end as a giant tidal wave of emotion. And it all stems from this little thought that Strega has, that the Dark Hour brings a sense of purpose to our lives. Now, in the original games, this was actually explored a little bit, through Junpei surprisingly enough, who you see at one point feeling a bit down that the removal of the Dark Hour would remove his special hero status that he sort of got. But it doesn't take long for him to realize that he's being a bit stupid about his feelings, and as a reward he gets to go and have the best romance in all of Persona-dom. So he moves on, and by the time he reaches the next dungeon, the entire group is just as dedicated to destroying the Dark Hour as they were when they first met Strega. But in the movie, Yuki actually gets to be a part of it, and we get to hear what his thoughts on the matter are. This first comes up when Fuka brings something up with the group, namely that her home life is difficult, her parents don't give a shit about her. But since she's joined Seas, she's had a new purpose in life, that maybe Strega was right. The Dark Hour may have given her a meaning to keep going on, since for once in her life she has people who can rely on and care for her. And that starts to awaken a realization in Yuki as well. He too didn't really have a purpose in life before the Dark Hour. He was a solitary island, but after his realization at the end of the first movie, he now has people he cares about, people he's willing to fight for and protect. But what will happen to those people once the Dark Hour is gone, when Seas disbands claiming mission accomplished? Why would they need him anymore? Sure, he was a great asset in combat with his quick reflexes and multiple personas, but without that ability, what use does he have? What reason could there be not to just abandon him, like everyone else in his life has? This comes to a head in the battle with the Hermit, where, after the beast is defeated, Yuki offhandedly and somewhat sadly mentions that they're nearing the end of the Dark Hour. Shinji, hearing this, gets exceedingly upset with Yuki. This leads to Shinji's persona freaking out and him revealing that he needs to take drugs to keep it in check, which again in turn leads to Ken finding out that Shinji was the one who killed his mother, and honestly the whole Ken-Shinji storyline is also handled really well in the movies, but we're talking about Yuki so I can't really go into it right now, but just know that it's really another reason you should order these movies right now. Anyways, where was I? Oh, yes, so Shinji freaked out at Yuki, and as a result, he starts to become even more confused than he was before. Is the removal of the Dark Hour the right thing to do? On the one hand, he obviously wants to protect those close to him, who will be throwing themselves at these shadows in order to get rid of it, but on the other hand, he doesn't want to lose the only place he finally belongs in. And so, we come to the infamous night of October 4th, the fight with Strength and Fortune. As I'm sure most of you will recall, this fight involves Shinji and Ken not being present for certain reasons. The confusion within Yuki has built up to such a point that he practically stands motionless for the entire fight. His friends try to get him to help, but he's frozen, only able to occasionally act defensively to protect any serious damage from befalling him or the others. As such, several members of the party end up unconscious, but still relatively unharmed. But eventually, Yuki does come to his senses and decides that he does need to kill the shadows to protect his friends. With the shadows defeated, Akihiko rushes off to try and find Shinji and Ken, a dark realization having dawned on him. The rest of your group give chase, and, well, a rather memorable scene plays out before you. But, do you see what happened there that was different from the game entirely? In the game, you arrived just in time to watch Shinji bleed out in front of you. There was nothing you could have done to prevent it. I mean, Akihiko blames himself because he didn't realize the date, and Ken blames himself for not being strong enough to forgive Shinji. But you? I mean, you did your best to get here as fast as you could, but didn't make it in time. From the game's perspective, this is a part of Akihiko and Ken's storyline, but for the main character, yeah, it's sad, but it's not directly tied to him in any way at all. In the movie, however, you weren't late because the fight was too difficult. You were late because Yuki hesitated. He couldn't decide what he wanted, couldn't realize what was more important to him, and if he hadn't been so preoccupied with his thoughts, maybe Shinji wouldn't have died. Oh my god, that is so much better than the game! It's actual development, a reason for the character to be invested in the death of Shinji. In the original game, the death of Shinji is certainly effective. It affects Akihiko and Ken, and it affects the party as a whole, and yes, it even affects you, the player. But for your insert the gormless mute that runs around with his hands in his pockets at all times. Does the death mean much of anything? No! Come next week, you're gonna be smoking cigars with a monk at the bar like you always do, and hitting up the karaoke bar. There's almost no reaction given to the character itself. But here, when the character has actual quirks and flaws, when we get to see the musings of the person Yuki Makoto, the death of Shinji has so much more impact. Guilt seeing as he might have been able to save him, depression at the thought of losing a friend, fear that maybe this is just the beginning, that maybe before long he'll lose more and more and more, until he's back to being the emotionless husk of a man he was at the start of the story. The death of Shinji hits so much more effectively because Makoto is a character. He's someone. In any case, I'm not going to go into too much more detail from here on out. Everything I covered is from the first two movies, and you really should check them out if you have a chance. I cannot believe how well they managed to capture and improve on the story of Persona 3. They really are well made. So, instead, I'm just going to end on this. Persona 3, more than any other Persona, is about the fool's journey as he makes his way through a variety of trials, encounters death, and eventually achieves the world. The game does an amazing job exploring this journey, but it forgets one key part of it almost from the beginning. The fool himself. Maybe if the game took more time to examine and analyze him, they would find a lot more meaning in the journey than they originally thought.
なんでどうでもよくない？どうでもいいって言われたろ。だって友達だから。森山さんが怒ってるのもね、私のせいなの。彼女の気持ちも考えないで無神経なこと言っちゃったから。そのことを謝りたいのになかなか言い出せなくて。多分許してもらえないのは怖いんだと思う。怖い？怖いよ。大切な友達だもん。だからどうでもいいはずないの。